Assalamu alaikum everyone. In today's class, we will be going to discuss paper 1 of O-level biology 5090. This is the paper of October-November 2020. Let's begin. MCQ number 1. The diagram shows part of a plant cell. Which part controls the entry of substances into the cell? So guys, if we talk about the structure that controls the entry of substances into and out of the cell, that structure is known as the cell membrane. So as you all know that cell surface membrane or cell membrane controls what enters the cell and controls what exits the cell. So we have to choose an option that signifies or that shows cell surface membrane. So guys, D is cell wall, A is the chloroplast, B is the cell sap in the sap vacuole, and C is the cell surface membrane. So the answer is C, because cell surface membrane controls the exchange of substances or the entry of substances into and out of the cell. Okay. MCQ number 2. Which statements about diffusion are correct? Molecules move randomly. Exactly. Whenever diffusion occurs, diffusion is due to the random movement of molecules or ions from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, down the concentration gradient. Molecules move down a concentration gradient. This is true as well for diffusion. Molecules may move through a partially permeable membrane. This is also true. Guys, you should know that partially permeable membrane is not required for diffusion. If there is no partially permeable membrane, diffusion will still occur. But if there is a partially permeable membrane, so molecules can still diffuse through the partially permeable membrane. Diffusion does not require a partially permeable membrane, but diffusion, however, can occur through a partially permeable membrane as well. So that's why statement 3 is right. The answer is A. Let's move on to MCQ number 3. An experiment measured the rate at which plants take up magnesium ions from the solution. One plant was given a poison that stops respiration. Another plant was left as normal. The graph shows the results. Okay, so if we talk about point N and the first graph, so the rate of uptake of magnesium ions is very high when the plant is left as normal. And if we talk about point P, and if we look at the graph of the rate of uptake of magnesium ions, if you look at the point P and the rate of uptake of magnesium ions when the plant is given poison, this rate is very low. So we can see when the plant is given poison, the rate of uptake is very low. And as it is mentioned above, that this poison stops respiration. This means that respiration is not occurring and energy is not released. So active transport cannot occur at P. However, at N, active transport is occurring. That's why rate is very high. Whereas at P, active transport is not occurring since respiration cannot occur. Energy is not there to support active transport. So over at P, at point P, the ions are taken up by the cells by diffusion. So how are the magnesium ions being absorbed by the plants at point N and P? At point N, the ions are being absorbed by active transport because the plant is normal. There is no poison to stop respiration. Respiration is occurring. Enough energy is provided by the respiration to carry out active transport, and also the rate of uptake is high. Whereas in case of point P, plant is given the poison, plant cannot respire, energy is not being released, and there is no energy to support the active transport. So at point P, the mineral ions are taken up by the cell by diffusion. So answer is B. Let's move on to MCQ number 4. Starch digestion occurs in the mouth cavity and in the duodenum, but it stops in the stomach. Why is this so? So guys, you should know that the enzyme which breaks down starch is known as amylase, and amylase works best at pH 7 if this is salivary amylase. If we talk about salivary amylase, which is found in saliva, then the salivary amylase works best at a pH of 7. And if we talk about the pancreatic amylase, which is found in the small intestine, it works best at pH 9. In the stomach, however, there is a pH of 2. Stomach is very acidic. It contains hydrochloric acid, which has a pH of 2. So amylase cannot survive in these conditions. Amylase is denatured by the stomach acid. So why is this so that starch digestion stops in the stomach? However, it continues in mouth cavity and duodenum because the pH in the stomach changes the shape of the amylase. The pH in the stomach causes the amylase to denature. MCQ number 5. Which part of a leaf absorbs and uses carbon dioxide from the air? Guys, always remember this thing, that the part that absorbs and uses carbon dioxide is basically a tissue or a cell that is photosynthesizing. Only the cells that are photosynthesizing take up carbon dioxide and use it, whereas the other cells who are just respiring, while the other cells which are just respiring will release carbon dioxide and not take up carbon dioxide. So the mesophyll in the leaf, only the mesophyll in the leaf carries out photosynthesis. So the mesophyll tissue of the leaf absorbs and uses carbon dioxide from the air. So the answer is B. Cuticle is non-cellular. It never absorbs carbon dioxide. Phloem and xylem cells do not photosynthesize, so they don't take up carbon dioxide. MCQ number 6. How do carbon dioxide and water enter a leaf? So guys, as you all know that carbon dioxide enters the leaf via stomata by diffusion from the air. However, water enters the leaf by transpirational pull. Transpiration occurs from the leaf, that is the loss of water vapor from the leaf, and this pulls the water up the xylem vessels into the leaf. The water moves from the roots to the leaves up the xylem vessel, and transpiration is basically the pull. Or we can say that a pull is generated by transpiration. Whenever water vapor is lost from the leaf, a negative pressure is created. Just like if we suck up the straw, a negative pressure is created at the top of the straw. So the liquid is pulled upwards. In the same way, in the similar way, or in the same way, when the leaf is losing water by transpiration, there's a negative pressure in the leaf which pulls the water up the xylem vessels, and this is called transpirational pull. And by transpirational pull, water enters the leaf. Let's move on to MCQ number 7. The graph shows how the rate of photosynthesis varies with light intensity at two different temperatures. Other variables are kept the same. In which sections of the graph is light intensity limiting the rate of photosynthesis? Guys, always remember one point, that how do we identify limiting factor in a graph? Remember this point. If you increase the level of a factor, the amount of a factor, if you increase the amount of a factor and due to this, rate of photosynthesis also increases. And due to this, and if due to this, rate of photosynthesis also increases, this means that factor is limiting. This means that the factor you increased is limiting factor. So we need to see that on which sections or at which sections light intensity is a limiting factor. We need to reduce this thing. So we can see that if we talk about the section S, so as the light intensity is increasing, the rate of photosynthesis is also increasing. And if we talk about Q, we can also see that if the light intensity is increasing, the rate of photosynthesis is also increasing. So at S and Q, if you're increasing the light intensity, the rate of photosynthesis is also increasing. This means that light intensity is the limiting factor at Q and S. This is what I told you guys, that how do you determine that which factor is a limiting factor? If you increase a particular factor, and due to this increase, if the rate of photosynthesis increases as well, this means that the factor you just increase is the limiting factor. At Q and S, we are increasing the light intensity and rate of photosynthesis is also increasing. But if we talk about R, so right now at R, we are increasing light intensity. However, there is no change in the rate of photosynthesis. Rate of photosynthesis is on y-axis. And also at P, if we are increasing the light intensity, there is no change on the rate of photosynthesis. So at P and R, increase in light intensity has no change on the rate. This means that light intensity is not a limiting factor at P and R. However, the light intensity is limiting factor at Q and S, because as we are increasing the light intensity, the rate of photosynthesis also increases. So the answer is B. Let's move on to MCQ number 8. What are the substrates and end products for amylase and lipase? As we all know that for amylase, starch is the substrate and amylase breaks down starch into maltose. So maltose is the end product. If we talk about lipase, then the substrate for the lipase is fats, and lipase breaks down fats into fatty acids and glycerol. So the end products are fatty acids and glycerol. The answer is C. Let's move on to MCQ number 9. What is the main function of the villi and the ileum? Guys, the examiner is asking you about the main function. Villi, the main function of the villi is to increase the surface area for absorption. Yes, guys, this is true. The main function of the villi is absorption of nutrients. And as you all know that villi are finger-like projections of the epithelium of the wall of the small intestine. So this increases the surface area because these are finger-like projections. To move digested food along the alimentary canal by peristalsis, guys, that is the function. Peristalsis is the function of circular and longitudinal muscles in the alimentary canal. Peristalsis is not the function of the villi. To produce mucus so that materials can move smoothly. Villi do produce mucus so that materials can move smoothly, but this is not the main function of the villi. Examiner is asking you the main function. That is A. To secrete amylase to digest starch in the food. Guys, do remember this point that villi never secrete amylase. Let's move on to MCQ number 10. The symptoms of a disease includes weakness, fatigue, aching in swollen joints, and swollen and soft gums. Guys, always remember this point, that whenever in a condition, if you see swollen and soft gums or bleeding gums, then straight away it is a vitamin C deficiency. So because of the soft gums, there is vitamin C deficiency. And what do we do to treat vitamin C deficiency? Which food is used to treat this disease? You need to give oranges as a source of vitamin C. The answer is D. MCQ number 11. The diagram shows transverse sections of dicot, root, and stem. Okay, guys, so this is the dicot root. And this one is the dicot stem. Okay, let's identify the structures. So guys, in the root, this X-shaped structure, or L, is xylem, whereas K is phloem. In root, the structure X is the xylem, and the tissue around the xylem is always phloem. Okay, if we talk about the stem, then in the stem we find vascular bundle. And if we talk about the vascular bundle, it contains xylem and phloem. So how do we know which one is xylem and which one is phloem? Guys, always remember this thing, that the outer tissue is phloem and the inner tissue is xylem. So how do you memorize this? Always remember that there is an O in phloem. However, there is no O in xylem. O means outwards. So phloem is outwards and xylem is inwards. Which tissue transports sugars? Guys, always remember that phloem transports sugars. So what is phloem? KN M. The answer is A. Let's move on to MCQ number 12. The diagram shows a cut plant shoot in a container of water. What will stop the movement of water up this stem? A fall in the humidity of the air. Guys, if the humidity of air falls, the rate of transpiration will increase and more water vapor will be lost from the leaf and more water will be taken up by the shoot. Always remember this thing, that when the rate of transpiration increases, the rate of uptake also increases. Because when the rate of transpiration increases, there's a strong transpirational pull, which pulls the water up the xylem vessels. So the rate of uptake increases. The rise in the air temperature, again, the rise in the air temperature will cause the rate of transpiration to increase. And because of that, the rate of uptake of water will also increase. A blockage in the xylem. Yes, this is the answer. If the xylem gets blocked, then the water movement up the stem will stop. An insect sucking sugar from the phloem. Guys, always remember this point, that if the insects are sucking sugars from the phloem, there is no change in the movement of water up the xylem, because the insects are sucking sugars from the phloem and the xylem is not involved. Okay, let's move on to MCQ number 13. Which pathway does oxygenated blood follow in the human body? So guys, as you all know, that pulmonary artery is the only artery in the body that contains deoxygenated blood. So A and B cannot be the options. Pulmonary vein, however, is a vessel which brings oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium, not the right atrium. So the pulmonary vein brings the oxygenated blood from the lungs to the left atrium, then the blood goes into the left ventricle, and then from the left ventricle to the aorta, and from the aorta to the rest of the body. So D is the answer, because this is the pathway that contains oxygenated blood. Let's move on to MCQ number 14. The graph shows a person's pulse rate or heart rate over a period of time during which they rest, paddle, and exercise bike, and rest again. At which point did the person stop paddling? Guys, always remember this point, that whenever the person starts paddling, the pulse rate or heart rate goes up, and the time at which the person stops paddling, obviously the heart rate and the pulse rate will go down. So whenever we start exercise, our pulse rate or heart rate goes up, and whenever we stop exercising, the heart rate or pulse rate goes down. So the examiner is asking that at which point did the person stop paddling? The answer should be B, because after B, the pulse rate is dropping or the heart rate is dropping. So when the person stops paddling, the heart rate or the pulse rate will drop. So the answer is B. Let's move on to MCQ number 15. Which row shows the blood pressures in the artery, a capillary, and a vein? Guys, always remember that arteries have the highest blood pressure and veins have the lowest blood pressure. So 13 would be the answer for the artery. 0.6, the lowest value, should be for the vein, and capillaries have a mediocre pressure. Let's move on to MCQ number 16. Anaerobic respiration takes place when there is a lack of which substance? Guys, the answer is oxygen. Whenever oxygen is absent, or whenever the oxygen is limiting, or whenever there is a lack of oxygen, then we start anaerobic respiration. MCQ number 17. The apparatus shown is used to make alcohol by anaerobic respiration. What are P, Q, and R? Okay, guys, so to make alcohol by anaerobic respiration, we use yeast, which is a fungus. So organism P will be yeast, that is a fungus, and fungus or yeast will feed on glucose. So solution Q is a glucose solution. And obviously, when yeast respires anaerobically on glucose, so what is formed? Ethanol and carbon dioxide. So the gas that escapes is CO2, carbon dioxide. The answer is C. Let's move on to MCQ number 18. The diagram shows the rib cage and some of the muscles involved in breathing as seen from the side. Okay, what happens when the intercostal muscles shown in the diagram contract? So guys, there are two types of intercostal muscles, external intercostal muscles and internal intercostal muscles. Okay, so the intercostal muscles labeled over here, are they external intercostals or internal intercostals? Guys, these muscles are internal intercostals. And how do I know that these muscles are internal intercostal muscles? Guys, always remember that if the muscles are moving towards the sternum, then they are the external intercostal muscles. And if the muscles are moving towards the backbone or vertebral column, then these are internal intercostal muscles. So you need to know the direction of the muscles. And by the direction, you will be able to deduce, you will able to know that which muscles are internal or external if you see these muscles in the diagram. Okay. So over here, the intercostal muscles that have been labeled are internal intercostal muscles. And as you all know that the internal intercostal muscles, what they do when they contract, they pull the rib cage inwards and downwards, right? So the internal intercostal muscles cause the ribs to move downwards or internally, right? So the answer is D. What happens when the intercostal muscles shown in the diagram contract? The ribs move down and inward because these intercostal muscles are internal intercostal muscles. They're not talking about the diaphragm. The lungs inflate. No. When internal intercostal muscles contract, the rib cage is moving inwards and downwards. So lungs are deflating. The pressure inside the lung decreases. No. Because the lungs are squeezed. So the pressure inside the lungs increases and the air is pushed out. I hope you get this MCQ. Let's move on to MCQ number 19. The diagram shows a dialysis machine. Which substance would not be present in a sample of dialysis fluid taken from point X? Guys, you should know that plasma proteins are never found in the dialysis fluid. So the answer is C. Glucose molecules, salt are added to the dialysis fluid, and urea is added to the dialysis fluid from the blood. When the dialysis fluid enters, it does not contain urea, it does not contain any plasma proteins. It only contains glucose, which has the same concentration as that of the glucose in blood. And the dialysis fluid also contains mineral ions and water with the same concentration as that found in the blood. So when the dialysis fluid passes close to the blood, urea diffuses from the blood into the dialysis fluid. However, there is no net movement of glucose, so there is no diffusion of glucose. If the mineral salts are same in the blood and the dialysis fluid, then again there is no net movement. In case if the person has low salt or excess salt, so the salt will move into the dialysis fluid. However, the plasma proteins will never move from the blood to the dialysis fluid. So dialysis fluid will never contain plasma proteins. We don't add plasma proteins initially to the dialysis fluid, and obviously after the dialysis fluid is flowing out of the dialysis machine, still it does not contain any plasma protein because plasma proteins do not diffuse out of the blood. So the answer is C. MCQ number 20. Which part of the skin has a major role in insulating the human body? Guys, do remember this point that fatty tissue is a heat insulator, which prevents heat losses from the body, or which minimizes the heat losses from the body. MCQ number 21. What describes a reflex action? Guys, always remember this point that reflex action is a rapid response to a stimulus, which involves the spinal cord. It can also involve the non-conscious regions of the brain. It is a rapid response detected by a motor neuron. Guys, motor neurons never detect anything. They are involved in a response. They are not involved in detection. So B is wrong. C and D are also wrong because it says slow response. So the answer is A. Let's move on to MCQ number 22. A person looks at some hills far away. Which row shows the state of the lenses, ciliary muscles, and suspensory ligaments in her eyes? So guys, remember rule of 5Cs for accommodation reflex. This is accommodation reflex. What is accommodation reflex? When we look at a far object or at a near object, our eyes accommodate so that the image formed is sharp and not blur. Okay, so what are the rule of 5Cs? Whenever there is close vision, what happens? When there is a close vision or near vision, the ciliary muscles muscle contracts. And what happens? The suspensory ligaments slacken. The suspensory ligaments become slack. They are not under tension. They are not taut. They become slack, and convexity of lens increases. Or we can say more convex. C for more convex. That means the lens become thicker. So over here, there's a far vision, not the close vision. So everything will be opposite. In case of far vision, the ciliary muscles will relax. They're not contracted. And the suspensory ligaments will be under tension. They will be taut, not slack. And the lens will be less convex. It will be less thicker. It should be thinner. The answer is D. Okay. What is the sign of diabetes mellitus? The sign of diabetes mellitus is glucose in the urine. Guys, glucose never appears in the person, in the urine. Glucose never appears in the urine of a healthy person. Glucose always appears in the urine of a diabetic person, right? We all have glucose in the blood, so this is normal. Insulin in the blood is normal. Insulin in the urine is normal. However, the glucose in the urine is not normal. Glucose is only found in the urine of a diabetic person. Let's move on to MCQ number 24. The diagram shows the bones of the forelimb. Which labels show where the muscle that straightens the hinge joint is attached? Guys, as you all know, that the muscle which straightens the hinge joint is the tricep, and tricep is attached at the ulna at this point, and also at the humerus at this point, and also scapula at this point. So the answer should be 1, 2, and 6, but over here we only have the option 1 and 2. We don't have the option 2 and 6. So the answer is A. Let's move on to MCQ number 25. Which of these diseases can be treated effectively with antibiotics? So guys, HIV cannot be treated with antibiotics because HIV is a viral infection. HIV or AIDS is caused by human immunodeficiency virus. It's a viral infection, and viruses cannot be killed or destroyed by the antibiotics. Viral infections cannot be treated with antibiotics. Malaria can also be not treated with antibiotics because malaria is not caused by bacteria. Malaria is caused by plasmodium. Plasmodium is not a bacterium. However, if we talk about syphilis, so syphilis is caused by bacteria. So syphilis is or can be effectively treated by antibiotics. So the answer is D, 3 only. MCQ number 26. The table shows the characteristics of 4 microorganisms. What could be a virus? Guys, if we talk about a virus, virus does not contain any cells. Virus is acellular or non-cellular. Virus does not contain nuclei, and virus does not produce spores. Spore production is the feature of the multicellular fungi. So the answer is A. Let's move on to MCQ number 27. A fermenter is used to produce penicillin, which is an antibiotic. Why is continuous stirring necessary during the process of fermentation? So guys, why do we stir the contents of the fermenter during the process of fermentation? Because we want to mix the fungus penicillium that is producing penicillin with the nutrients and fresh air or oxygen. To keep the penicillium in contact with the fresh oxygen and nutrients, this is the answer. That's why we stir. Let's move on to MCQ number 28. Which statement describes the relationships in the ecosystem? Carbohydrates are passed on from decomposers to producers. No, guys, it's opposite. From producers to decomposers. The molecules from all the organisms in an ecosystem pass to the decomposers. Energy is passed from carnivores to herbivores. No, this is wrong. From herbivores to carnivores is true. Proteins are passed from the primary consumers to producers. This is again wrong. Proteins are passed from producers to primary consumers. So answer is D. Carbohydrates are passed from producers to herbivores. This is true. Herbivores consume producers. So carbohydrates are passed from producers to herbivores. This is true, guys. So the answer is D. Let's move on to MCQ number 29. The diagram shows a food web of organisms found in a pond. Which organism is both a herbivore and a carnivore? Okay, guys, a herbivore is an organism that consumes plants. So algae over here are plants or producer. So mosquito larva, you can see that mosquito larva is feeding on the algae. This means it's a herbivore, and mosquito larva is also feeding on paramecium, which is a herbivore. So mosquito larva is also a carnivore and a herbivore. Mosquito larva is a herbivore because it is feeding on algae, and mosquito larva is also a carnivore because it is feeding on paramecium. So the answer is C, mosquito larva. Let's move on to MCQ number 30. The diagram shows the nitrogen cycle. Which stage is carried out by nitrifying bacteria? So guys, always remember this point, that nitrifying bacteria convert ammonium to nitrates. So ammonium compounds in the soil are converted to nitrates in the soil. This is done by nitrifying bacteria. So the answer is B. Let's move on to MCQ number 31. 3 statements about malarial parasites are correct. Which methods can be used to control malaria? Okay, so we need to look at which of the 3 statements or which of the 3 methods are correct or can be used to control malaria. Insecticides are used to kill vectors. This is true. If you use insecticides to kill female Anopheles mosquito, which are the vectors which transmit the plasmodium or malaria, if we kill the vectors, if we kill the female Anopheles mosquito, which transmits the pathogen or the plasmodium, so it will definitely control malaria. Netting is used to keep the vectors away from the people. Again, netting prevents the spread of malaria because netting prevents the vector biting the people. People take drugs that stop the malarial pathogen developing. This is also true. People take anti-malarial drugs prophylactically before the malaria even occurs. People usually take the drugs before the malaria develops in order to prevent the development of malaria. So the answer is A, 1, 2, and 3. MCQ number 32. What would be an undesirable feature in an insecticide? Guys, you all should know that the most undesirable feature of the insecticide is biomagnification. What is meant by biomagnification? The problem with insecticide is that insecticide is not broken down in our bodies and it cannot be excreted. So what happens that if an organism consumes an insecticide, for example, if 5 small organisms are consuming insecticides, and if a large organism then consumes those 5 organisms, the large organism will get all the insecticide from those small 5 organisms. Guys, when we spray insecticides kill the insects, but the problem is that this insecticide dissolves in water and so is consumed by small aquatic organisms. So for example, if 10 small aquatic organisms consume the insecticides, then they are consumed by 5 fishes. So what happens that the insecticide consumed by 10 small aquatic organisms will not be broken down. The insecticide will remain. And when these 10 small aquatic organisms are consumed by fishes, so each fish will have a lot of insecticide. And when these 5 fishes are, for example, eaten by a shark, so shark will have a lot of insecticide that was almost equal to the insecticide consumed by 10 small aquatic organisms. So this is known as magnification. What happens that the insecticide cannot be broken down and excreted. So it becomes concentrated as we go along the food web. It becomes more concentrated at each stage in the food web. Answer is A. It breaks down within a few months. If this was the case, then this would be a very desirable feature. If an insecticide can break easily, we want insecticide to break down eventually, because we use insecticides for the temporary purpose. We want to kill insects. Once the insects are killed, the insecticide should be broken down. But this is not the feature of insecticide. If this was the feature, then this would be definitely a desirable feature for us. It destroys one particular insect only. This is a desirable feature, guys. This is not an undesirable feature. Insecticides are specific, so they kill only one particular type of insect. So this is a desirable feature, not undesirable feature. It destroys the immature form of an insect. This is also a desirable feature. If immature form of an insect is affected, then obviously the insect will not mature and will not transmit the disease. Let's move on to MCQ number 33. The diagram shows a flower cut in half. Which two parts of the flower produce haploid gametes? Guys, always remember that the parts of the flower that produce haploid gamete are those parts which carry out meiosis. So guys, anthers, meiosis occurs in anthers. And as we all know, that anthers produce pollen grains, and pollen grains contain haploid male gametes. Okay, also 2, which is ovule, contains female gamete that is produced by meiosis. So anther and ovule, these are the two structures or two parts of the flower in which meiosis occurs to produce haploid gametes. The answer is 2 and 4, C. Let's move on to MCQ number 34. The diagram shows a section through a non-endospermic seed. Which structures develop into adult plant? So guys, as we all know, that 2 is the plumule, which develops into the shoot of a new adult plant, and 3 is the radicle, which develops into the root of the new adult plant. So 2 and 3 are the parts of the seed which develop into an adult plant. So the answer is C. Which row describes a cause, a symptom, and treatment for syphilis in males? Guys, syphilis is caused by bacteria. Always remember this point. And syphilis is treated by antibiotics, and development of painful joints or arthritis is one of the symptoms of syphilis. The answer is A. Let's move on to MCQ number 36. The diagram shows the changes in the thickness of the uterus lining during one menstrual cycle. When would the levels of progesterone and LH be highest? Guys, always remember this point. Whenever the thickness of the uterine lining is maximum, the level of the progesterone is highest. Always remember this point. As we all know that progesterone stimulates the thickening of the uterus lining or the endometrium, and progesterone maintains the endometrium. So whenever the thickness of the uterine lining or the uterus lining or the endometrium is maximum, it means progesterone is maximum. So progesterone is maximum between day 19 and day 23. That's why the uterine lining is the thickest. However, as you all know, LH is highest at the day of ovulation. Whenever ovulation occurs, LH is highest because LH surge at day 14 causes ovulation. The answer is B. Let's move on to MCQ number 39. Which human characteristic shows continuous variation? So guys, as you all know that if there are less phenotypes, so it is obviously discontinuous variation. Also, if there are large differences between the two phenotypes that can be distinguished easily, then it is discontinuous variation. If we talk about body mass, so there are a lot of people with many different body masses. So there are a lot of possible body masses, and there are very little differences in the body mass. For example, I can have a body mass of 70 kg, and some other person can have a body mass of 70.1 kg. So there are very little differences between the body mass, right? Same goes for the heart rate, and same goes for the height. Body mass, heart rate, and height, they have numerous values. There can be a lot of body masses, there can be a lot of heart rates, and there can be a lot of heights with little differences between the values. However, if we talk about sickle cell anemia, then there are only two characteristics. The person could be normal. If the person has a normal hemoglobin, the person could be normal. Or if the person has an abnormal hemoglobin or the sickle cell hemoglobin, the person will have sickle cell anemia. So there are only two phenotypes, and there are large differences between the two. A normal person is absolutely normal. However, a person with sickle cell anemia, however, a person with sickle cell anemia has a severe disease. So this is the discontinuous variation. So the human characteristic that shows discontinuous variation is sickle cell anemia, whereas the body mass, heart rate, and heights, they all belong to continuous variation. Let's move on to MCQ number 38. The diagram shows the blood group phenotypes of some members of a family. Which member of F1 generation must be heterozygous with codominant alleles? Okay, so guys, in this MCQ, they are saying that this diagram is showing the blood groups of phenotypes of some members of a family. So they are talking about blood groups. Which member of F1 generation, this is the F1 generation A, B, C, and D. Which member of F1 generation must be heterozygous with codominant alleles? It means they want us to recognize a person that has IA and IB. These are two codominant alleles, and this genotype is heterozygous. Okay. So if we look at the diagram, over here, the parents both have blood groups O. This means that the genotype is IO for both the parents. It means that the child A will also have blood group O with IO and IO genotypes. However, the children of A and B have blood group B and A. This means that over here, the person B must have one allele that is A and one allele that is B. Because to have a child with blood group B, one allele comes from parent B and the other allele comes from the parent A. So BO genotype makes blood group B. Whereas to have a child with blood group A, the IA allele comes from this parent and IO allele comes from this parent, making blood group A. So it means that B is the answer, because we need to figure out the member of the F1 generation with codominant alleles, that is IA and IB. The answer is B. Let's move on to MCQ number 37. In a species of mouse, fur color can be black or white. This means that there are two characteristics, or we can say there's a single characteristic, that is the fur color, but that can be black or white. So one of these characteristics will be dominant and the other will be recessive, obviously. So we need to figure out whether the black trait or the white trait is dominant. Two black female mice were allowed to mate with the same black male. So they say that there were two black female mice and they were allowed to mate with same black male. One female had 9 young, all of which were black. The other female had 7 young, 5 black and 2 white. Okay, so what you can deduce from this information? Guys, always remember this thing. Always and always remember this thing. This is very, very important. Guys, if two organisms cross and if the children have a trait which is not common in parents, this means that the trait received by the children is recessive trait. What is meant by this statement? Over here, when two black mice have crossed, some white mice are produced. So whenever you observe that दो जो parents हैं उनकी जो characteristic है, for example वो black mice हैं, when they are crossing तो children में बिल्कुल एक अलग characteristic आ रही है, ठीक है? So जो अलग characteristic आ रही होगी वो recessive होगी. What do I mean to say? Whenever two parents cross, and if they have the same characteristic, if the two parents have same characteristic, and the children which are born have a characteristic which is not common in parents, which is totally different, it means जो different characteristic आई है वो recessive characteristic है. That means that white mice are recessive. They have both the recessive alleles because they have a recessive trait. For a mice to have a recessive trait, both the alleles should be recessive. So one of these white mice was male and is allowed to mate with a heterozygous female, which is obviously capital A, small a. Heterozygous means one dominant allele and one recessive allele. What is the expected ratio of phenotypes of their offspring? So guys, as you all know, whenever a heterozygote is crossed with homozygous recessive, the phenotypic ratio is 1:1. So one black and one white will be the answer. The answer is A. Let's move on to MCQ number 40. A farmer wants to produce extra large sweet oranges by selective breeding. So what farmer wants, guys? Farmer wants to produce the oranges which are extra large and sweet. And farmer wants to do this by selective breeding. Using information from the table, which plant types should the farmer select for breeding? Okay, so the farmer should select those plants which have a larger size and which have a higher sugar content. So if we look at 4 has large size and also high sugar content. So the farmer can choose 4 and 2. 2 has a larger size and a relatively higher sugar content. So the answer should be C, 2 and 4. Okay, guys, so we are done with the paper. I hope everything is clear to you. This concludes our section. If you have any queries, do let me know. Thank you for watching. Allah Hafiz.